The December wind wasn't just cold, it was a predator. It howled across the Montana plains like a starving wolf, driving snow so thick it felt like the world was ending. Ethan Cole knew that sound. He'd heard it in the high mountains, a sound that promised to strip the flesh from your bones if you gave it half a chance. 3 days he'd been on the trail from Billings. 3 days of ice and misery. All he wanted was his own fire, a bottle of whiskey, and the familiar silence of his empty ranch. But the storm had other plans. Through the whiteout, a fence line appeared, a ghost in the blizzard, the Lane property. Ethan pulled his horse up short. Smoke curled from the chimney of the little farmhouse, a lonely light in the growing dark. But something was wrong. Nailed to the gatepost, half covered in snow, was a crude wooden sign. For sale. Ethan's blood ran cold. Tom Lane selling his farm? It didn't make a lick of sense. That man loved this stubborn patch of dirt more than anything. He'd poured his sweat and his soul into it for 10 years. The land itself wasn't much, just 160 acres of rock and patchy grass. But it held a secret more valuable than gold. It held the water rights to Crystal Creek, and with the railroad coming through next spring, whoever controlled that water controlled the future of the whole valley. Just as he swung down from his horse, the farmhouse door creaked open. A woman stepped out. She clutched a thin shawl around her shoulders, her face pale as a ghost in the stormlight. Martha. "Mr. Cole," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands betrayed her, twisting the fabric of the shawl. Ethan tipped the brim of his hat. "Martha, I saw the sign. Where's Tom?" Her jaw tightened. Behind her, a small face with wide, frightened eyes peered out the window. Annie, their little girl. She couldn't be more than 6. Martha's eyes filled with a grief so raw it was like a physical wound. But her voice, when it came, was hard as frozen earth. "Tom's gone. Pneumonia. 2 weeks now." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Tom Lane, a good man, a loyal neighbor, the kind of friend you could count on when the world went sideways. Gone. Just like that. I'm I'm sorry, Martha," Ethan managed, the words feeling small and useless. She just gave a single, sharp nod, then gestured toward the barn. "Stable your horse. There's coffee on the stove." The barn was a mess. Tom would have never let it get this way. The livestock looked thin. The hay was scattered. It was the look of a place giving up, the look of a person stretched too thin. The weight of the world was already crushing Martha Lane. The kitchen was warm, a small pocket of safety against the storm. Annie was at the table, sketching on a piece of slate with a nub of charcoal. "That's a fine horse you're drawing, Annie," Ethan said, his voice softer than he intended. "It's Papa's horse, Buttercup," the little girl said, not looking up. "Mr. Crow took her." Martha went rigid. "Annie, go check on the chickens." The child scurried away, and Martha sank into a chair, looking old and broken. "Silas Crow has been here," Ethan stated. It wasn't a question. "Every day since the funeral," her voice cracked. "He holds the note on our loan. Tom borrowed money for seed last spring. Crow says with Tom gone, the loan is due in full. Right now." She clenched her hands into fists. "He offered me half what the place is worth. If I don't sell, he says the sheriff will foreclose by the end of the month. I've got $17, Mr. Cole, and a daughter who still asks when her papa's coming home." Ethan stared into the black coffee she'd poured him. He thought of his own ranch 20 miles north, stable, successful, and empty. He thought of the time Tom Lane had ridden with him against rustlers, taking a bullet in the arm that was meant for Ethan, a debt he had never been able to repay. "It's the water rights," Ethan said. "It's always been the water rights," she replied bitterly. "Crow knows the railroad is coming. He's got friends on the board. He wants to be a rich man." Ethan stood up and walked to the fireplace. On the mantel was a photograph. Tom and Martha, young and full of hope, holding a baby Annie. A family's entire future, about to be wiped out by a greedy man and a bad winter. The thought came out of nowhere. It was reckless. It was insane. But it was the only thing he could think of. It was the only way. "Martha," he said, his back still to her, "there might be a way, not charity, a business arrangement." He turned to face her. "Marry me. The silence in the little kitchen was deafening. The only sound was the wind screaming outside the windows. Martha stared at him, her face first flushing with color, then draining to a deathly white. I, I beg your pardon? Hear me out, he said, his voice low and urgent. It's a business deal. Under territorial law, when we marry, this farm becomes my property too. Crow can't foreclose without my signature. He can't force a sale. He took a step closer. I'll pay off the loan. You and Annie stay here, in your home. I get access to the water for my own herd. It's a fair trade, and it's a way for me to pay my debt to Tom. She looked like he had struck her. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. People will talk, she whispered. Let them talk. Talk is cheap. Losing your home isn't. I can't, she said, her voice breaking. Tom is barely in the ground. And Tom would want you and his daughter safe, Ethan countered gently. He wouldn't care about propriety. He'd care about you. She studied his face. He wasn't a handsome man. The sun and the wind had been cruel to him, carving deep lines around his eyes and mouth. But those eyes were steady, honest. He was a man who kept his word, a man who had ridden into a storm and now was offering her a lifeline. It would be a business arrangement only, she said, her voice hard, testing him. Separate rooms. I will not be your wife in that way. Ethan felt a strange heat rise in his neck, but he met her gaze without flinching. Understood. We would be partners. Nothing more. Before she could answer, Annie's small voice cried out from the top of the stairs. Mama, there's a man coming. It's Mr. Crow's carriage. Martha's face went slack with terror. A moment later, heavy boots stomped onto the porch. Ethan put a hand on her arm. Let me handle this. He opened the door. Silas Crow stood there, flanked by two of his hired thugs. He was a man who was used to getting his way, and his smile was as cold and thin as a razor's edge. Cole? Crow sneered. Fancy finding you here. Paying your respects, or just circling the kill like the rest of the vultures? The lady isn't selling, Ethan said, his voice flat and hard as iron. Crow's pale eyes glittered with amusement. She can speak for herself. She doesn't have to. We have an understanding. Crow's smile faded. He looked from Ethan's stony face to Martha's pale one. What kind of understanding? The kind that's none of your damn business. The air crackled with tension. Crow's men shifted, their hands drifting toward their guns. For a long moment, the only sound was the howling wind. Then Crow's smile returned, colder than ever. 3 days, Mrs. Lane. You have 3 days to sign the papers. Then the loan comes due, and I doubt Mr. Cole's understanding is going to cover it. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving a trail of threats and cigar smoke in his wake. Ethan closed the door. Martha was shaking. 3 days, she whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. Then we'd better move fast, Ethan said. My offer stands, Martha, but you have to decide, now. Her gaze drifted to the stairs, where her daughter stood watching, her small face a mirror of her own fear. She thought of Tom. She thought of the life they had built. She thought of the promise she had made to him to always protect their child. She looked at Ethan, this hard, unreadable man who was offering her the only path she had left. All right, she said, her voice barely audible. God forgive us, all right. The wedding was a cold, quiet affair. It happened in the small church at the edge of town, with the snow still piled high against the windows. The only witnesses were the preacher's wife and the town blacksmith, and a small girl with sad eyes who didn't understand what was happening. Martha wore a simple gray dress. Ethan wore the same coat he'd arrived in. The preacher rushed through the words, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Ethan's "I will" was a low rumble, steady and sure. Martha's was a whisper, lost in the wind. He slipped Tom's old wedding band onto her finger, a circle of gold that felt like a circle of iron. It was a vow made not of love, but of desperation, a contract signed in the face of ruin. Back at the farm, the new reality settled in like the winter cold. Ethan moved his things into the small spare room off the kitchen. Martha and Annie stayed upstairs, two separate worlds under one roof. He worked from before sunup to long after sundown. He mended the fences Tom had let fall into disrepair. He patched the leaking roof of the barn. He split a winter's worth of firewood. the steady rhythm of the axe a release for the tension coiling in his gut. Martha cooked. She cleaned. She cared for Annie. She kept a wall of polite silence between herself and Ethan. He was always Mr. Cole. Her eyes never met his. But Annie was different. She followed him everywhere, a tiny shadow in the cold. She asked 1,000 questions. She showed him her drawings. She told him stories about her papa. One afternoon, she asked the question that stopped his heart. Do you think Papa can see us from heaven? Ethan knelt down in the snow, his rough hands gentle as he brushed a stray curl from her face. I reckon he can, sweetheart. And I reckon he's proud of how brave you're being. From the kitchen window, Martha watched, and for the first time, the icy wall around her heart felt a small, painful crack. That night, she brought out Tom's old ledger. The loan is $200, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Crow added fees. He means to break us. I have it, Ethan said. Her head snapped up. You have it? How? He hesitated. He didn't like talking about his own affairs. Sold some cattle last spring. Been saving it. Her eyes widened. You'd spend that on this? I'm paying a debt to Tom, he said gruffly, and I'm protecting my investment in those water rights. He wouldn't let her see that it was more than that. He wouldn't let her see that looking at her, and Annie was like looking at a ghost of the family he himself had lost. The next morning he rode into town. Silas Crow's office was opulent, a stark contrast to the struggling town outside. Ethan slapped the stack of bills on the polished desk. The Lane note, paid in full. Crow counted the money with a condescending slowness. I'm impressed, Cole, but don't think this changes anything. That land, that water, it will be mine. You've only delayed the inevitable. We'll see, Ethan said, his voice a low growl. As he walked out, Crow's smug smile was gone. In its place was a look of cold, calculating hatred. Ethan knew this wasn't over. He'd won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. Something was changing. He could feel it in the small things. An extra biscuit left on his plate in the morning. A patch on his favorite work shirt that hadn't been there the day before. The way Martha's eyes would sometimes meet his for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. One night Annie came down with a fever. For 2 days they barely slept, taking turns bathing her forehead with cool water and whispering soothing words. They sat side by side in the dark, their shoulders brushing, a silent team united in their worry. But the ghost of Tom was still there. Ethan would see Martha staring out the window toward the road, her expression filled with a grief that he had no right to comfort. He was a stranger in her house, a name on a piece of paper. He was the man who was not her husband. Then came the night of the fire. He woke to the smell of smoke and Annie's terrified screams. The barn was an inferno, flames leaping into the night sky like angry demons. He ran, barefoot and half-dressed, grabbing buckets, his mind a cold, clear machine of action. He got the few remaining animals out, his hands and face scorched by the heat. Martha stood by the house, clutching Annie, her face a mask of horror. In the flickering firelight, Ethan saw them, 2 figures slipping away into the darkness, Crow's men. By dawn, the barn was a smoking ruin. Their winter hay, their tools, 2 of their best horses, all gone. Martha collapsed onto the porch steps, her body shaking with sobs. He'll never stop, she wept. He'll keep coming until we have nothing left. Ethan knelt beside her, his clothes reeking of smoke, his skin raw from the heat. He won't stop as long as he thinks you're alone, he said, his voice rough. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. But you're not alone, Martha. She looked up at him then, and in the gray light of dawn, surrounded by the wreckage of their lives, she saw him. Not as a business partner, not as a replacement for her dead husband, but as a man who would stand between her and the fire, a man who would burn for her. The wall around her heart didn't just crack, it shattered. A week later, a rider came from town with a message. It was from one of Ethan's own ranch hands. Boss, the note read, trouble. Crow's hired on a new gun. Man named LaBeouf. Says he's a Texas Ranger. He's been asking questions, not about the farm, about you. Ethan crushed the note in his fist. LaBeouf. The name was a ghost from a past he thought he had buried deep. A past that had nothing to do with Montana, and everything to do with a bank robbery in Waco and a partner who had betrayed him. Martha saw the look on his face. Ethan, what is it? He forced a smile. Nothing, just ranch business. But it was a lie, and he had a terrible feeling that Silas Crow hadn't just hired a gunman. He had hired Ethan's past, and it was coming to collect. The Texas Ranger's name was LaBeouf. He rode into town like he owned it, all swagger and silver-plated pistols. He wasn't like Crow's usual hired thugs. This man was different. He was smart, and he was patient, and he was asking questions about Ethan Cole. Ethan knew he was running out of time. LaBeouf was a bloodhound. Once he got the scent, he never let go. And the scent he was on was 20 years old, leading back to a failed bank job in Texas and a man named Ethan who had vanished with the money, leaving his partner to take the fall. The partner had been LaBeouf's brother. One afternoon, Martha found Ethan in the half-rebuilt barn, cleaning his rifle with a grim intensity. "You're scared," she said. It wasn't an accusation. He didn't look up. "A man who ain't scared in this country is a fool." "This is about more than just Crow, isn't it?" she pressed. "The man in town, LaBeouf, he's looking for you." Ethan finally stopped, his knuckles white on the rifle stock. "Some things are better left in the past, Martha." "Your past is threatening my daughter's future," she shot back, her voice sharp. "I have a right to know." He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, and knew she was right. He owed her the truth, all of it. So he told her. About the war, about the desperation that followed, about the bad choices he'd made as a young man, about the robbery, his partner's betrayal, and the years he had spent looking over his shoulder, waiting for a ghost like LaBeouf to appear. When he was finished, the silence in the barn was heavy. "So you're a wanted man," she said, her voice quiet. "Always have been. And you married me, knowing this man could show up and destroy everything?" "I married you to protect you," he said, his voice raw. "It was the one right thing I thought I could do." She walked toward him until they were inches apart. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear warring with something else he couldn't name. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I know." Then she did something that shocked him. She reached out and touched the scar on his cheek, her fingers tracing the old wound with a feather-light touch. "We all have scars, Ethan," she said. "Doesn't mean we're not worth saving." The dam inside him broke. He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. It wasn't like the passionate, reckless moment they'd almost shared in the cave. This was different. This was two broken people finding a piece of themselves in each other. It was a kiss that tasted like forgiveness. But just as he let himself believe they might have a future, a shadow fell across the barn door. LaBeouf. "Well now," the ranger drawled, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "This is a touching scene. I almost hate to interrupt." Ethan pushed Martha behind him, his body shielding hers. "This is between you and me, LaBeouf. She has nothing to do with it. She married you, Cole. That makes her part of it." LaBeouf's eyes were cold and empty. "My brother died in a prison camp because of you. You took the money and ran, and left him to rot." "Your brother shot a guard," Ethan said, his voice low. "I never touched the money. It was never about the money." "Tell that to a judge," LaBeouf sneered. He drew his pistol. "But you won't be seeing a judge. I'm taking you back to Texas in a pine box." From the corner of his eye, Ethan saw movement. Silas Crow stepping out from behind the farmhouse, a shotgun in his hands. It was a trap. "Looks like your luck has run out, Cole," Crow said, his face alight with triumph. "The ranger gets his justice, and I get my land. A perfect business arrangement." Then everything happened at once. LaBeouf fired. Ethan dove, tackling Martha to the ground, the bullets singing over their heads. From the farmhouse porch, a rifle cracked. One of Crow's men screamed and went down, clutching his leg. It was the blacksmith from town. And behind him, the other ranchers. The community Tom Lane had built was here to repay their debt. A full-blown gunfight erupted in the yard. LaBeouf and Crow were pinned down behind the water trough. Ethan laid down covering fire while the ranchers advanced. "It's over, LaBeouf," Ethan yelled. "You're not getting out of this." But LaBeouf wasn't a man who surrendered. He made a run for the horses, using Crow as a shield. Crow, the coward, squealed as a bullet meant for the ranger tore through his shoulder. Ethan had a clear shot. He could end it right there. And the man who had haunted him for 20 years. But then he saw Annie, peeking out from behind the woodpile, her face white with terror. And he knew he couldn't. He wasn't that man anymore. He wasn't a killer. He was a husband. He was a father. He lowered his rifle. Let him go. LeBoeuf scrambled onto a horse and disappeared over the ridge, a ghost returning to the shadows. Silas Crow was whimpering on the ground, his reign of terror over. The yard was quiet, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. Martha ran to Ethan, throwing her arms around him, holding on as if she would never let go. Annie ran to them both, her small arms wrapping around their legs. They were a family, forged in fire and fear, but a family nonetheless. A month later, the first locomotive of the new railroad line thundered through the valley. The water from Crystal Creek was more valuable than ever, but it belonged to the Cole family now. Ethan never heard from LeBoeuf again. Some said he'd given up the badge and disappeared. Some said he found his own kind of peace. Ethan had found his. One evening as the sun set over their prosperous fields, he stood on the porch with Martha, watching Annie chase fireflies. "He could have killed you," Martha said quietly. "Why did you let him go?" Ethan looked at his wife, at the love and trust in her eyes. He looked at the little girl who called him Papa. "Because some debts," he said, pulling Martha close, "are paid by living, not by dying." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and together they watched the stars come out over the Montana sky. The wind still whispered across the plains, but it no longer sounded like a wounded animal. It sounded like a promise. What makes a person change? Is it love, or is it the chance to be better than you were before? Ethan Cole was given a second chance at having a family, and he took it, even when it meant facing down the ghosts of his past. He chose to build something new instead of running from something old. If you believe in second chances and in the kind of love that can heal old wounds, hit that subscribe button and join our community. We've got more stories of the wild, untamed West coming your way, tales of grit, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.